You're listening to Art Affairs, episode 60. Today I'll be talking to Kirsten Anderson. Alright, so my name is Michael Faith, and this is Art Affairs. Art Affairs is my attempt at shining a spotlight on the many wonderful people that make up this amazing art community, featuring conversations with artists, gallerists, curators, telling their stories. You can dig through previous episodes, complete with show notes, at artaffairs.podcast.com, but the best way to stay plugged in is to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. And if you're really enjoying the show and want to help support what I'm doing here in an even bigger way, check out the Art Affairs Patreon. Not only does it give you an opportunity to help keep the show going, but there are several community-oriented benefits as well, like getting early access to episodes and suggesting questions for upcoming guests. You can find all the information about that at patreon.com/artaffairs. You can also connect with the show on Instagram and Facebook at Art Affairs Podcast. All right, so today's guest is gallerist, curator, and owner of Roq la Rue, Kirsten Anderson. Kirsten has been such an influential voice in the art scene over the years, and a mainstay in the Seattle art community for more than 20 years now. But like with anything of that nature, it was definitely a journey to get to where she is today. We talk about how she first got started running a gallery in the late 90s, the epic arc of the pop surrealism movement, which she obviously had a hand in helping to create, the emotional roller coaster of the last few years, which saw her closing and reopening the gallery, all the exciting shows she has coming up for the remainder of the year, and so much more. So I hope you enjoy my conversation with Kirsten Anderson. Kirsten, welcome to the show. It's really good to have you on.
Yes, thanks for asking me.
All right, and it's awesome because, like, just a couple episodes ago when I had Casey Walden on, he had actually recommended I have you on, like, when I asked him at the end, which was interesting because I had already scheduled it with you. So it was just, like, serendipitous that just two episodes ago he mentioned you.
That's great. Yeah, Casey's awesome.
And also, I mean, you're somebody that I've been wanting to have on for a while just because of how influential you've been in the art community over the years, and just a mainstay in the Seattle area for the better part of, 25 years, approaching that. Mm-hmm. But it didn't start there. So I wanted to start with your background a little bit. And I know that you were born actually in Canada, but then at a young age, I think your family moved to originally Georgia, yes. And then ultimately settled in like Seattle. So tell me about that trajectory a little bit. How did you end up coming to the States and then eventually settling in Seattle?
Well, let's see. So I was born in Ottawa and lived there. My mom came from sort of a military family. My grandfather was an admiral in the Canadian Navy, and so they moved around a lot. So that's just sort of been always in our DNA. And so I grew up in Ottawa and around there, like in Quebec and various places. And then my mom remarried when I was quite young to a doctor who was stationed isn't the right word, but given a job in Macon, Georgia. So we moved there. And she then divorced him. And my siblings and I were getting older. And she's like, yeah, I kind of, we were in sort of a small town in Georgia. And she's like, I think I want to go somewhere else as the girls are getting older. And she did a road trip and went all over the United States. And she just really fell in love with Seattle. She thought it was a very art forward, liberal, easy to live in, and beautiful city. So we just upstaked and moved here. And then over the years, I've actually tried to move away multiple times. I tried to move to Europe. I tried to move to the Southwest. And I went back to Canada a few times. And I always just keep winding up back here. It definitely has its magnetic pull, that's for sure. And since I've opened the gallery, obviously.
Yeah, that's definitely a way of anchoring you to a place. And I read that your parents, at least in some form, were artists. So tell me about that. Like, what type of artists did you grow up with?
So my dad was a painter, and my mom she did various things. I feel like her strength at the time was really in illustration. My dad was, they didn't work as painters, like they did set design and things like that. And my mom, who is extremely, extremely talented, sort of became preoccupied with family and sort of put it on the back burner. But fortunately, she's picked it back up. Nice. Within the last 20 years, she's really done. She does glass artwork and stuff in metal, and she's just incredible. Yeah, but needless to say, I grew up surrounded by art and art books and fellow artists, and so it was just something that was always part of my life. And my entire childhood was spent drawing. I mean, there was sort of no question that I was going to be an artist, and that was my trajectory. And I just kind of assumed it would always be that way. And so I just voraciously devoured art just sort of on my own. It was just part of our family culture. You just learned everything by osmosis, really.
No, that's awesome. Did you end up going to art school?
I didn't. I was going to go to art school, or I considered it. But my parents' family friends who were artists were like, don't go to art school. Don't spend the money. Just make art. And I sort of did. And, I was a painter, but I wasn't really that good. Like, I had a passion for it, but I had a very strong critical voice in the back of my head that kind of ruined the fun a little bit for me, and a lot of anxiety over exhibiting. And I just sort of, I had a show like in a cafe, and they were like, hey, we need someone to curate the other shows for us. Do you know people? And I was like, yeah, I know people. And that's actually how I started curating. I was like, oh, actually, I like showing other people's work more than mine. Like I enjoyed that a lot more. And that's the genesis of that.
So you started just showing your work, and then the place that you were showing asked you to start curating?
Yeah. And I found that I really liked keeping my hand in sort of the art scene, but without, my background made it so I could understand what good art was. Like, I knew about composition and like all the things that make a good painting. I felt like that's my strong suit, is understanding art. I know the history of it and what constitutes good artwork versus not great artwork. And so all those skills I was learning, thinking I was going to be a painter, just transferred over to curating. And so it just became very, very natural.
So was there like a definite point in the road where you're like, okay, I have two paths I can take. I can continue really trying to improve my craft as an artist and go that route, or go into curating and actually showing other people's work? Did you have that kind of introspection moment where you think, okay, this is a more fulfilling path for me?
Yeah, actually, this is a really weird story because it was very sort of fortuitous, I guess. So I was working in an art supply store and grousing about something with a coworker, and she said, hey, if you could do anything in the world, not, you didn't have to be paid, like you were rich, what would you do? And I immediately said I'd open a gallery. And it wasn't something I'd really thought of before. But Juxtapose magazine, I had been sort of reading that for a year, and Juxtapose back then was very different from what it is now. But Juxtapose, every time an issue came out, I would just devour it. Like my heart would start beating quicker, like, oh my gosh, what am I going to discover now? This is amazing. Nice. I was completely obsessed with it. And I was just like, I want that artwork to be in Seattle. So that was my thought. I was just like, I think I'd open a gallery. I have no idea what I'm talking about. I've never worked in a gallery, And the next day in the paper, there was an article that came out by a local arts curator named Larry Reed, who was like the old sort of guy in the 70s who had this sort of punk rock gallery. And he was talking about his experiences and how Seattle really needed a new young gallerist to come along and show this sort of new artwork that had been bubbling up. And like the clouds parted and the angels swarmed around, and I was just like, this is my sign. And like a day later, my stepdad, who had been working in Egypt, said, hey, I made a ton of money over there, and I'd like to give you kids some money. I'm going to give you $5,000. I know you've been curating in this cafe. You seem to really enjoy it. Maybe you'll use the money towards something like that, but you can do it for whatever you want. And I immediately went, and I was walking around the neighborhood. I found a building that was about to be torn down. But because the demolition was still about 6 months out, they were asking, they were trying to get young businesses to come in as an incubator. So I got a space for $200 the next day. And I was just like, I'm just going to do it for the summer and see how it goes. Maybe it'll crash and burn. I don't know. And that's the start of Roq la Rue. And so I opened it, and it just grew and grew and grew from there.
And so this was back in 1998, just to give folks an idea of the time frame and where we were as far as art history,
Yes.
Okay. And so I guess, thinking about the rest of the art scene in Seattle at that point, just, as you're starting to get your foot in and had this idea of starting up a space, had you been active in the art community in general? Were you going to other gallery shows and just feeling out the scene?
No.
Is that because there wasn't anything? There wasn't a scene?
Seattle's always kind of struggled with its art scene. We've had this, absolutely incredible music scene, and even the theater scene. And so I was sort of I was more adjacent to the music scene. I worked in record stores and things like that, all through the 90s, and spent most of my time going to see bands. Obviously, it was a big time in Seattle for that. The whole grunge scene, which I actually was not into. I had my nose in the air about that. But, there's a lot going on, and it was great. So the art scene, there wasn't really anything. I found it to be extremely conservative and maybe a little intimidating in that I just sort of didn't, on one hand, I just sort of didn't care about what I was really seeing. I felt like it was kind of cliquey, and I had no interest in being part of it. And what attracted me to this new art scene, lowbrow, that was being shown in magazines like Juxtapose, was that it was the opposite of that. And, it was punk rock, and it was really cool. And it was, taking all these subcultural influences that I was into, and I immediately got. And so it was completely different from what the fine art scene was doing. And that was part of my whole, why I loved it, is always being attracted to the subcultural and the other, so I didn't really want to be part of it. And so, with the gallery, I was just like, yeah, I'm just going to do this on my own. I'm not reaching out to those people. I'm reaching out to my people. And long time was very, considered the redheaded stepchild of the art scene, which I embraced. I thought that was great. And a lot of confusion about what I was doing, which I also thought was great. And, and that's the art scene. I immediately had an audience for what I was doing. There's a lot of people who really clued in on it very early and really dug it. And so I was just like, I'm just having my own little separate thing to the right. And it was awesome.
Now, I love that you took the whole punk rock ethos that you were experiencing on the music side of things and applied it to the art scene. I think that's really cool.
Yeah. That's what was happening at the time. And I wanted it to be in Seattle. Seattle at the time, you could afford to do things like that. You can't do it anymore, I don't think. It's crazy. But back then, rents were affordable. You could always find some old guy with a building who'd rent you a space cheap, as long as he didn't have to do any repairs or anything like that. So it worked out great.
So, having the idea to show is one thing, but then actually having, doing the business side of a gallery is a completely different thing. So how did you learn that? Did you have any experience with business, or is it something you kind of just learned over time and grew into organically?
Here's the thing. I always say it's not that hard. And as far as the business aspect, I was like, look at all these ding dongs who are running businesses. If they can do it, I can figure it out. And that's been sort of how I've done everything in life is like, if these goofballs over here can do it, I can do it, or I can figure out how to do it. And so with a gallery, it's really, really simple. You don't have a huge amount of merchandise to keep track of because your inventory changes every month and it's on consignment. All you do is you don't spend your artist's money. So if you make a sale, half of that goes away. You don't touch it. And then you pay the artist. And that is really it. I mean, obviously there's things like rent, insurance, advertising, supplies, everything from the little vinyl you need for the lettering to cards to invite, all that stuff. There's definitely a lot of expenses to wrangle, but it's really not that hard.
You make it sound so simple, but it seems like a thing that a lot of people get wrong. I mean, we have horror stories over the years.
Yeah. It never ceases to shock me and about all those horror stories. And it's very aggravating to, see all the hatred that's directed towards galleries. Like, everybody wants to be part of the gallery system, right? But if they're not in it, they're going to tear it down. There's a little bit of sort of sour grapes, but then there's legitimately so many galleries that have ripped people off.
Yeah.
It's amazing to me. And I think a lot of it is that, the business side is not the difficult part in running a gallery. It's the curatorial side is what's difficult. And sticking to a particular vision seems to be very difficult. Like, you can't just throw things at a wall. Like, I've talked to so many galleries over the years that are like, their rosters are all over the place. The styles they show are all over the place. And they think that they're going to put something on the wall and it's going to sell. And that's not it. You have to cultivate a client base, and they have to trust you. They have to trust your eye, and they have to trust that, you're going to support the same artists over and over again. And they have to trust that the work's going to hold value. As no one can guarantee that, but as much as you can, you can kind of know who's probably going to stick around, who's got the chops and who doesn't. That's the difficult part. And that's something that you can't go to school for, I don't think.
Right.
So I think to be a good gallerist, you have to sort of know your art history. I see a lot of galleries. I mean, I'm kind of segueing here, but a lot of galleries who show work that's very derivative. And because they don't know, maybe better that this artist is completely copying this artist. And so if you know your art history a little bit better, you can catch that. And then just knowing what good art is and being very true to your vision. And then if you have a vision, the people who share that vision will find you. And I credit that for Roq la Rue. I mean, we have changed over the decades. Obviously, we've gone from lowbrow to pop surrealism or what have you. And, but if you like one show, you're probably going to like the others. There's a common thread that runs through everything I curate. And I attribute that and not ripping off artists to my longevity.
Yeah. I mean, you're the common thread. You're that common thread to all of it. Yeah. I guess, do you remember what that first show was that you launched with?
Yeah, I had a show. So underground comics were super huge at the time. I don't know if you recall in the 90s, that was a big thing.
Fantagraphics, I think, was in the area, right?
Yeah. So I had a show with Fantagraphics artists. I had Jim Woodring and Jim Blanchard and Jeremy Eaton. And, Jim Woodring's sort of a legend now in the underground comic scene. And I was just like, let's do a show. And they were like, who is this chick? But okay. And we just did it and it was great. So those early shows were a little bit rough because I didn't, I was still learning what I was doing and I was a little shy about reaching out to some of the people I'd seen in Juxtaposed. But within a few months, I did that. And I was very lucky. I was in Seattle because that sounded really cool and glamorous, I think, to a lot of artists. And I wasn't competing with other galleries in LA. I wasn't being perceived as competition because I was way up in the hinterlands of Seattle. So getting the artists I want actually came very easily to me. I was very lucky to I started early enough, and Seattle was appealing enough, and it just kind of worked out.
Yeah, and I mean, you picked up steam, obviously, and I guess, was there a point where you were like, you said those shows, it took you a little time to get comfortable with reaching out to people and drumming up support for what you were doing. I guess, was there a point where you're like, oh, I made it, or did that success and kind of growth come over time, almost like the whole boil frog analogy? They don't realize it until it happens.
Yeah, no, I definitely, there's multiple tiers. I felt like I made it when I opened the doors to the space of like, oh my gosh, 14-year-old me would be so stoked to know that this is what I'm doing right now in the future. I felt like I made it then. I felt like I made it when I, got into the page in Juxtapose where they have all the pictures of the little galleries and the artist events. Like when we were in that, I felt like I made it. When I was quoted as a source, I felt like I made it. When I actually started making money. And that didn't happen for a long time. There wasn't a lot of money in the scene when I first started. And I was very lucky. I attracted a couple of silent partners very early on who helped me. Because when I started, I had a morning job as well. I was working. I'd get up, I'd work in a cafe, and then I'd come open the gallery. And again, it was a long time ago, so I didn't need a lot of money to do this. But I needed more. And I had a couple of silent partners who came on and said, well, hey, we love what you're doing. We want to be part of it. Here's a little bit of money. We don't want any curatorial say. We just want to, come to the parties and say we're involved. And I was like, great. Thanks. As long as you don't want anything to do with the curation, that's fine. And they were great. And it was very helpful to feel like I had people in my corner. So that was another thing that made me feel like I made it. Eventually, I don't have silent partners anymore. I was able to get control back. So it's all mine.
So just over the years, it's just been these little milestones that you've hit that incrementally, I guess, feels like successes.
Yeah, I've been really lucky. I definitely would wake up every night for 7 years of like, oh God, how am I going to pay the rent? And it was 7 years where I was worried all the time. And then one day we just sort of had enough in our savings, and it got to the point where I'm like, well, maybe this show didn't do very well, but the next one will. Like that took about 7 years to where I was like, I think we're going to be okay. We made it over the hump. We can attract enough, people that are going to do well that I don't think I have to really lose that much sleep over rent. It's certainly not every night. So that probably on year 7 was when I sort of was like, oh, I think this is going to work.
No, that's amazing. And I read an early interview with you where you were talking about how your notoriety in the art scene grew faster outside of Seattle than necessarily in Seattle.
Oh, infinitely. Yeah.
So I guess thinking about that, like introspectively, why do you think that was? Why do you think that you became a larger name outside of your local community?
One, I didn't care about the local community at the time. I was really not involved. And part of it was like, I would get sort of these write-ups and things, and it was always this very, we don't know what she's, like, whatever she's doing, what's this art? It's crying girls and bloody teddy bears. Like, I'm like, no, no, it's, well, sometimes it is, but not always. And I had a real passion for it, and despite the fact of what you're hearing now, I can actually write very eloquently about this art scene. And I saw a lot of value in it. I saw it really as a new working class art movement, and that was very worthy of being noted and celebrated, and was a legitimate new art movement. And art movements always work like this. They're derided And then people are like, oh, well, maybe there's something to it. And then they become huge and then they fade out. And I knew that was going to happen with this. And so I was just like, I'm on for the ride. I'm completely devoted to it, like absolutely devoted to it, and started writing about it. And I think that helped. I feel like the artist I was picking helped. And a big thing was that this was the start of the internet, like 98. People were really like getting into the internet. And so I am one of the, sort of early galleries that were like, oh, I got to put everything online. I got to email people. I've got to get the word out beyond my city. And from day one, I always considered myself a national gallery that happened to be in Seattle, not a Seattle gallery. And the whole sort of lowbrow pop surrealism seems just starting to, I just got in early on that wave, and surfed it the whole way. And because I was there early and showing really amazing artists, word just spread.
Yeah. Cause I mean, that was like the time that Mark Wrighton was really getting super popular. Camille was really becoming a big name. I remember
Shag and Tim Biscup and oh my God, so many people. Todd Shore, Audrey Kawasaki.
And you remember that, like you mentioned the presence and impact of the internet. Even before I became aware of just the gallery community in general, I knew Mark Wrighton's work. Like I had seen it on AOL one day,
yes. Yeah.
And so they become these kind of household names, and then, you being involved in that. And so I want to talk a little bit about movement names and labels, because you've been a part of that transition from lowbrow to pop surrealism and wrote the literal book on pop surrealism.
Yeah.
So I wanted to, and you mentioned your writing, so I want to dive a little bit into your experience just with publications. And so in 2004, you released the book Pop Surrealism. So did you coin the phrase of the movement? I mean,
in terms of it being applied to this art movement, yes. But, and I'm quite open about this story, I completely stole the term. So I had decided, hey, I'm going to do a book. I want to do a survey of this art movement because I had seen the rise of figurative work happening in the New York art scene. And I was like, people like John Curran could totally fit in the pop surrealism scene, but he obviously is not. He's in this whole other stratosphere. So I was like, I'm seeing this happening. And I'm like, these artists in my scene have been doing this first. And I wanted to put some kind of timestamp on it, and proof that this was a whole thing, before I felt that figurative work was going to make a big resurgence in the fine art scene, or whatever, high art scene, whatever you want to call it. So I was like, great, I'm going to do a book, and I'll showcase a bunch of these artists, and just like I said, to kind of put a timestamp on it, and talk about what they were doing. And so I reached out to a lot of artists, and everybody wanted to do it, and I was just going to call it lowbrow. That was the term that was going at the time. And then a few artists, I think it was Mark Wrighton and Todd Shore, were like, we don't know that we really want to be called lowbrow anymore. We put a lot of time and energy into our work, and it's a little more refined than, like the Piz or, people like that who were like legit lowbrow, and not to I'm not denigrating their skill or talent or efforts in any way, because obviously I championed them. But you could see what they were doing was a little bit different. And they're like, we don't really want to be in a book called lowbrow. And we want to be in the book, but what do you think about calling it something else? So I was like, oh God. So I reached out to people who were sort of pivotal in the scene then, like Billy Shire from La Luz de Jesus, and Greg Escalante, obviously. I'm sure he's come up in your podcast many times. There probably wouldn't be a scene without him, and Billy and Robert Williams, obviously. Anyway, so I reached out to all of them and said, hey, I've got to call it something else. What do you think? And they were just like, ugh, good luck.
Yeah, what an enormous responsibility that just landed on your shoulders.
Right? I was like, oh no. So I had a book by Kenny Scharf, who, if anyone doesn't know, was a sort of a fixture in the New York sort of punk rock new wave art scene, alongside Keith Haring and Basquiat. And he was known for these very cartoony images he would do. And I was reading his book, and he referred to his own artwork as pop surrealism. And I was like, oh, that's a great term. And I wrote it down in the notes with a bunch of other names. And I sort of presented it, sort of a list to people, and everyone liked pop surrealism. And I'm like, okay, I'm swiping it. I'm just going to, and I had no idea what was going to happen with this book, if anyone would even care, if we'd even get a publisher. So I just called it that. And it worked. And I actually met Kenny Scharf a few years later, and I was just like, hey, so I wrote this book called Pop Surrealism, and I totally stole the term from you. And he's like, oh, am I in the book? And I'm like, no. He's like, oh. He goes, well, that's okay. That's cool. So I got his blessing, and everything was fine. And I'm quite open that, I always cop to that. I got the term from him, indirectly. And yeah, so that's how that worked. And so obviously writing that book gave me a little more cred and clout. And that led into me working with High Fructose magazine. That was sort of a direct result of the book. I think 2006 is when High Fructose started coming out, and Juxtaposed was starting to transition into showing more of a street art kind of vibe. And a lot of the artists who were in the pop surrealism lowbrow scene were kind of getting left behind. And Fructose came along, picked it up, and did this amazing, obviously gorgeous publication. And I reached out to them, and I was like, hey, I would be happy to write. I love what you're doing. I'd be happy to write, or contribute in some way. And they were like, great, yeah, we'd love you to write for us. And so I got an honorific, which was editor at large. I had no editing responsibility at all whatsoever. It was just to sort of be a level up from writer, I suppose, because at the time, I think maybe the gallery and my book was more well known than High Fructose. And obviously that's completely changed. So they were being nice to me, basically. But I was mostly just a writer there for 7 years. And I wrote a lot of stuff for books and things like that. And that all came out of the pop surrealism book.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about editor at large. I've seen that term, but I've never really double clicked into what that actually meant. But you were with them for like 7 years, like 2007 to 2014 is what I have down here. So I guess how is that role related or had synergy with the work that you were doing in the gallery? Like, were there certain aspects of it that benefited from each other?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm sure that it did. It gave me more clout. And so when I reached out to people, I think my name started to carry a little more weight in the scene. Whatever that means. I think it just became a lot easier to access. I don't know, like, this sounds so weird, but this all came really easy for me. And it sounds weird to say that, but it just kind of seemed like I was always supposed to be doing this. The way that it came about, the way that it's continued. So yeah, I don't really even know what to say about it. So I'm sure it definitely benefited. But, it's not like, I interviewed Kehinde Wiley, he's not going to give me a show. Like, it's like the people outside the world, having a gallery might have opened that door too. He's like, oh, she's in the art world, so I'll talk to her. Like, I think having the gallery gave me access to some artists outside of the scene that we wanted to talk to that maybe wouldn't have otherwise, but because they could check me out and see what kind of art I was dealing with, they agreed to talk to me at that point. So that was helpful.
No, that's cool. And I guess, being there for that period of time, how did you see the magazine evolve over the years?
I think they've always had a very, their own, Annie Owens and Attaboy have they have an amazing eye. They are able to find artwork. I don't know how they do it. They're incredible. And they've always been a little to the left. So they showed a lot of the stars of the scene, but they always were really great about reaching out and like finding new people. And I think they still do that. So that segues into the concept of what the scene even is anymore. I referenced early on that, all art scenes have an arc, and the lowbrow pop surrealism scene has had its arc. It's now, I don't know that it even exists anymore. I think it's just sort of, it arced like a rainbow and it's come down, and now it's just people doing fine art. It's become different things, and the galleries who used to all sort of show a lot of the same artists now have vastly different rosters, and they've evolved and changed. And I think we've all kind of done that. I think I might be one of the old galleries that has stayed pretty somewhat consistent. But a lot of people sort of got into the street art side of things, and everything that came out, it's like a hydra. One art scene has spawned a million little scenes. And so different gallerists are going to want to explore different facets of it.
Well, I guess it just begs the question in general of what the value of labels even is. You have, lowbrow kind of graduated or evolved into pop surrealism. Now there's kind of a catch-all new contemporary art, kind of umbrella term that catches all of them. So, I guess how do you feel about just labels at all and what their value even is?
It's one of those things, like everybody hates labels, right? But you kind of just need them. The question I get asked every day at the gallery is, what do you call this kind of art? Because people want to find out more about it. They want to know, what do you put in the search engine to find out more? So I get it. It makes sense to me. I don't really have a problem with it. Even now, people will be like, well, what do you call this? And I'll be like, well, it's pop surrealism. Some people call it new contemporary. Those would be what you type in the search thing. But, it's really, I'm like, is it magical realism? Is it, I think there sort of needs to be some new terms to sort of differentiate within new contemporary. New contemporary doesn't really mean anything. It's just new. It's, so it's, what are the components? It tends to be figurative. It tends to be technically very proficient. Tends to have fantastical elements while not being fantasy. So, sitting there saying that over and over again gets tiresome. So a label comes in really handy.
Yeah. Well, then we need a new book from you. We need a new name.
Yeah. My publisher asked for a long time, but I feel like I have sort of, the gallery had and the pop surrealism scene sort of had its heyday, I'm going to say from, it was really rocking 2005 to 2015 probably. And again, still exists and people are still doing very well, but it fragmented so much. I sort of feel like I'm specialized in one sliver of the new contemporary scene. What I show is very different from what ThinkSpace shows, which is very different from what Hashimoto Contemporary shows. Copro Nason is still showing a lot of what they have always shown, which is sort of an emphasis on the darker arts. So, and I'm still sort of doing this sort of super refined, figurative, fantastical, darkly beautiful, elegant kind of work. So yeah, I could talk about that. I could talk about my sliver, but I couldn't talk about the new work, ThinkSpace shows now. They've changed a lot. And that's not my style of art. So I'm not going to talk about it because, everything I do is driven by passion. That's why it works.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And so you mentioned that kind of arc and that trajectory, and 2015 being a notable date, and that was a year before you closed down Roq la Rue for a period. So I want to talk a little bit about that journey, because it has gone in kind of a roller coaster over the years, and I remember that happening and being kind of taken aback. So I guess what prompted your decision to close down the gallery?
It was burnt out. So I had a big gallery. We were sort of at the top of our game, but I could sense a change coming in that Instagram had shown up. So I don't know how many people talk about Instagram, but that was a bit of a game changer.
Sure.
On one hand, it was absolutely fantastic because my exposure to so many more artists and everybody's exposure to more artists really just rocketed. But on the other hand, it created a more of a way for collectors to contact artists directly. And so what I found was happening a lot is that I would have a show and collectors would go, hey, cool, there's a show. This artist is obviously on the rise. I'm just going to contact them directly and buy a piece or commission a piece or whatever. And the gallery would get cut out of that. So what was happening is that there was a lot of people benefiting from the gallery system, but the gallery wasn't making very much money, getting cut out of a lot of sales. And that's not a sustainable business. And also, I mean, I have what I call as an artist gallery agreement, which is more like a memorandum of understanding of like, hey, I'm going to do this for you, and in return, I expect this. And so we're all on the same page, but it's not a contract. I don't keep contracts because I sort of feel like, if we don't want to work together anymore, what am I going to do? Take you to court? No, So, let's just try to be cool. So, I didn't have a lot of protection in place. And I would kind of get my nose out of joint a little bit about the whole thing. I understand it all around. But at the end of the day, I am running a business that benefits. And if I feel like it's not appreciated, I'm like, that's not great. So there's a little bit of that, but that was more sort of a symptom of sort of a deep burnout I was feeling. I was having at the time, like almost 3 shows a month, simultaneously, but it was a lot of work. I brought on like a partner to help me, and it just sort of didn't work out. She sort of needed to be a gallerist herself. We were sort of the same person. And so it's just like, and that was a bummer. And yeah, I was just really exhausted, and I had started to segue completely differently working in wildlife conservation, which is my hobby. And I was like, people give me a lot of money for this. Maybe I should be doing this for a while. And I thought, I think I'm just going to take a break. I'm just really burnt out on the art scene, and I'm going to try doing wildlife conservation. And I was really gung ho about that. And I thought, okay, I'm Roq la Rue's at its height. I'm going to go out with a bang, instead of sort of dwindling away. And so I closed it and never thought I'd go back.
Well, I was going to say, because just a moment ago you said, I need to take a break. Did you think of it as a break, or was it, I'm done?
No, at the time I was done. I was done. So I ended up not being very good at being a fundraiser. It's another thing too. Like I'm sort of a certain age now. I've been doing art world stuff my entire life. And sort of what I was discovering is, I kind of alluded to everything I did came very easy to me, and everything sort of just really worked out well. So I kind of had a little bit of an ego about it, like, oh, well, this will too, because everything I touch turns to gold. And that did not happen. And so I had a little bit of a humbling moment, and also realizing, hey, if I move into this whole other realm, I'm going to be starting at the bottom. Mm. And I was sort of excited, like, oh, I'll have new milestones to meet. I really like that. But it didn't really hit the same way.
And this is the Curator Wildlife Project, right? That we're talking about?
Yeah. And so we did some good things. We continue to, but the conservation world is a whole other animal. Like I thought the art world was tough. It is nothing compared to the conservation world. Like there's a lot to it. That's a whole other conversation. And I sort of became a little bit depressed, and I actually got really depressed. And my whole world was the art world, and my whole social standing was built in the art world. And I knew I was walking away from that. But I didn't really realize how much it would affect me and how many people in my life were as a result of the art world, and how the art world gave me a really good life. And I assumed someone would sort of pick up the mantle. When I closed, I was like, some other gallerist is going to come along and be like, sweet, I'll do it now. And they never did in Seattle. It just didn't happen. And I missed the art. And so I thought, well, maybe I'll start a shop or something like that. And I can show artwork too, and I'll just try to do something different. And, it's a long story. But eventually I was just like, you know what? We're just going to be Roq la Rue again. There's a need. People want it. I want to do it. It's a little embarrassing because I said, I was like 2 fingers up in the air, like, I'm out. Oh, hi, I'm back again. But no one seemed to mind. Everyone seemed very happy about it. And we just picked up where we left off.
And so just thinking about the logistics of that, like when you first decided to close down, I know a lot of galleries will plan years ahead of just getting, the new shows on the calendar and everything. So did you know far enough in advance that you were going to be closing, or like, is that something that you had seen a year, 2 years in advance, or was it more of a momentary decision that you came to?
I would say about 6 months before I closed, I sort of had made the decision of like, I think I'm going to pursue this other thing. And I think the artists in the last 3 months probably all knew I was going to do that. And some of them did not appreciate that. Understandably, like who wants to do a solo show at a gallery that's about to close? So I get that, but everyone was actually really cool. And I mean, to be honest, when I wrote on Facebook that I was closing, I got so much incredible response and so many beautiful notes of what the gallery meant to people. And it was like being able to read your obituary, before you die. Like, seriously, it was one of the most moving things that ever happened to me in my life. And that, in no small part, was like, maybe I shouldn't have closed. This had meaning for people beyond me. That was something that, I was feeling. I got into conservation because I felt like I wanted to make an impact on being a positive force on earth, and then to realize, hey, the gallery was doing that too for people. That was a really profound thing. And I think a lot of these galleries, in this particular art movement's orbit, do that for a lot of people. Yeah. And it's hard for us, when we're like, oh crap, I got to pay the rent and this and that, and I got to chase this person down, and this artist didn't frame their work. Oh my God. and all this stuff. It's like, you lose sight of, the art world is so funny. There's art making and the power of art, which is one thing. And then there's the art world and the business side of it. And I got lost in the business side of it. And then to sort of be reminded of the power of what art does for people's lives.
What do you think it was in that break that allowed you to come to that realization?
A lot of it was sort of, to be honest, I got really depressed. I didn't really even recognize it. It was my boyfriend was just like, you need to do something. Like you're, I don't know if you know this, but you're quite depressed. And I was like, oh yeah, I am. And sort of for the first time in like, I guess 18 years, I didn't have a driving purpose, which I had with the gallery. And I thought I would find it in conservation, but I also found that so difficult and so weird and so not what I expected that I was just like, oh God, I don't know what I'm doing anymore. I've known I was doing for so long and now I don't. And I I missed all the community of the art world as well. And part of that is sort of a transactional thing that I was quite aware of like, people in the art world, it's a business, and there's friendships that are sparked, but they're somewhat transactional, but that doesn't mean they're not friendships nonetheless. And so I missed that. I missed the community a lot. And so that really was like, oh, maybe I kind of screwed up. Maybe I should do this again. It kind of seemed like maybe that was my purpose. Like I thought, oh, my purpose is to save animals, but maybe through art, I can do that too. So.
And so was that in your choice to open, rather than reopen Roq la Rue, you chose to open a new space called Curator House.
Yeah.
Was that your attempt at kind of blending those two worlds together?
Yeah. Yeah. Originally, The idea was like, hey, we'll do shows. I'll be more focused on probably environmental artworks, maybe. But, I was still working with people like Peter Ferguson, who even when I quit was like, oh, you're still going to sell my artwork. And I'm like, well, we should get you another gallery because, you should be in gallery. And he's like, nah, you can sell my artwork. And so people like that, I still had a roster of people who supported me. So I wanted to show their artwork. And I kind of had this vision of like, well, I did Roq la Rue. I should do a different gallery. It's a new era. And then finally I was like, this is still just Roq la Rue. And this is going to sound really funny, but I kind of viewed the gallery as this, over the years, it almost became its own entity. Like Roq la Rue is me, but it's also this amalgamation of everybody who's shown there, of people who, might not buy artwork, but came to every show, and loved the work, or collectors who supported the art in the gallery for years and years and years. It was bigger than me. And I felt like it was almost like this slumbering lion in the corner. And I was like, it sounds really weird and metaphysical and woo, but I felt like it needed to, if I was going to be doing this, it needed to be as Roq la Rue.
Yeah. And I guess when you did make that decision to, reopen the space proper, were there aspects of what you learned from closing down and, things that you wanted to implement to avoid some of the challenges that you faced, like burnout, to do it differently this time?
Yeah, actually, one thing that changed, I attribute it a little bit to getting older as well, and the scene changing. When I was younger, I was extremely ambitious and extremely competitive. And, I wanted the gallery to have impact and to be important and to have power and all that stuff. And I don't anymore. And what I mean is, I want the gallery to be influential and to be regarded highly, but I don't need to build an empire. There's multiple times where I'm like, I should move to LA. I should move to New York. I should be doing this. I should be doing more art fairs. I should, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I have a gallery because I like having a gallery. I like having a place where people can come see art in a beautiful environment. I can speak to that. I hate an art fair. They're just like big trade shows to me. I did them. I might do them again, but I would prefer not to, unless they were really enticing. I just kind of was like, I don't want to have 5 galleries. I just want to have my gallery, and I just want it to be awesome, but I don't need to be doing 3 shows a month. I just want to do one show. I want to pick the creme de la creme of artists, in my view, and focus on that. So I really, my life became a little bit more well-rounded, I suppose.
Nice.
If that makes sense.
Have you still been able to stay connected with the conservation work that obviously was a big part of your life?
Yeah. Actually, I'm more successful as a conservationist through the art world. And a lot of that is, I pre-COVID was going to Africa a lot, and I posted it on my socials, and got a lot of interest. People like, oh, I always wanted to go there, but I don't know how to do it. So I'm like, hey, why don't you come with me? And so I started with a friend of mine who's a safari guide. We started taking people on safari with the idea that I want to take artists on safari if possible, because it's going to blow their mind. And took a lot of people, not that many artists to start, but like I took Anthony Ausgang and his wife, and that was awesome. But I took Mark Ryden and Marion Peck on safari, and it blew their mind. It was so incredible to watch people, see African wildlife in the wild, and to realize this still exists in the world. This isn't a park. This is real life that's worth saving. And to sit in a herd of elephants, and hear them rumbling and talking to each other and eating, and to be in such a presence of such a thing changes your life. So, Mark had done a print with me in 2008. And that was actually my start into the conservation world. We did a print called Bunny Cart, and it raised $50,000, and I gave it to an elephant orphanage in Kenya, and who then invited me to come out and visit the project. And that's how I started going to Africa all the time. So that was because of Mark Ryden. And so I wanted to get him out there to see, this is what, we were helping. So they finally agreed. They had an amazing time. And then Mark was like, hey, I want to do some more. So he's done a few prints where he's given Creatura, my nonprofit, the money to divvy out as I see fit. And so in the last year, we've raised a phenomenal amount of money through his generosity.
It's awesome.
Yeah, and it's gone to these super amazing projects that will have tangible results. And I can talk about them if you like, but that is diverting from the art thing.
Yeah, no worries. Because I do feel that this is an important aspect. I was going to ask you just like, how do you feel about the state of the world with this being something that's so close to your heart? Are we trending in a good direction, bad direction? No comment. Where do you stand on that? But I'd love to hear more about your projects too.
Yeah, it's part of what I was referring to is sort of trying to become a more well-rounded person versus just an art world freakazoid who does nothing else, which I was happy to do for decades. And I'm not alone in thinking, I think every artist feels this weight of just like, things are not good. Things are not good. Things are in motion that cannot be stopped in terms of what we've done to the environment. It's not going to be good. But at the same time, if you give in completely to despair, then there's you have to be optimistic in some way, or you're never going to get anything done. And you also don't hear in the news about really any of the good stuff. And there's a lot, I kind of alluded to conservation being difficult. There's a lot of corruption in that world. But that said, there's enormous amounts of people doing incredible, selfless work in that world. And that's what gives me hope is, there's a lot of little projects in action where people are making tangible differences. And I travel to go see those things to keep me going. And I found these people who are doing incredible work. And if I can just shovel money at them, I'm not going to go save anything. I'm not going to save an endangered species or whatever. That's not my background. I'm not equipped, but I am equipped to make money, and I can get that money to those people to do their work. And that's good enough for me. So,
What are some of the active projects that you're focused on now?
With the last print that Mark Ryden did, we funded actually 6 projects. So we funded Mara Elephant Project, which is in Kenya, which does a lot of elephant protection in sort of elephant corridor areas. So that is a lot of helping rangers do their job, get them kitted out, get the patrols doing what they do to keep those animals safe. So Mara Elephant Project in Kenya. There's the Elephant Protection Trust in Kenya in another area where a friend of mine, Keith, is a gyrocopter pilot who patrols an area that is unpatrolled by Kenya Wildlife Service. So he picks up the mantle and does it. But his gyrocopter needed an engine rebuild. So we paid for that. And then there's a very exciting project that we're doing with Saving the Wild, which is also it's all over Africa, but the project that we're focused on is in Kenya. And it is a beekeeping program where they are training 20 young Maasai women. Maasai is one of the tribal groups there that are in the area that we want to protect. And it's training some of the young women there to keep bees and sort of implementing a whole beekeeping project, sell the honey, the money comes back to the community. And what's interesting about that is, one, it provides sort of economic resource to impoverished communities. So they don't have to sell their land to agriculture or other purposes. So you can keep the land wild, which means the animals can live on it. So it's a win-win for everybody. And then, obviously more bees in the world is an important thing. So we funded a year of that project. And then we funded, I wanted to do some projects in the US. So we funded the bat sanctuary in Texas, because that's my personal pet project.
Is that near Austin? Because we're a big bat city.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I live in Austin.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. The bat sanctuary. I'm pretty sure it's in there.
Awesome.
Yeah, I love bats so much. They're my sort of very close to my bats and elephants, as you may have noticed. And then a wild horse project, Wild Love, the Wild Love Project, which saves wild Mustangs from being culled. That, and then there's a few people I'll see on Instagram who are like, I save possums in my free time and I need formula for the babies and kind of thing. I'm like, here's some money to save the little possums, Uh-huh. There's all these little sort of small rehabilitators who spend all their own personal money saving the wildlife in their neighborhood. And if I can shovel a little money at them too, that makes me feel really good. So
awesome. That's really cool.
Yeah.
So shifting gears a little bit, we talked a lot about kind of the emotional roller coaster over 2016, 2018. And then 2 years after that, we have a global pandemic that obviously has an effect on the ability for people to meet in person.
Yeah.
And so I know you ended up having to board up for a while.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you a little bit about how that played out. Like, at what point did you know, okay, well, I need to plywood up my walls now, and then eventually reopen? Like, what was that decision-making process like for you?
Well, it's kind of made for me because I was a block away from the whole sort of Chaz/Chop, like where all the shit was going down. That was in my neighborhood. So, we had all the sort of activist and cop fights were happening a couple blocks away. And there was very unpredictable. It was happening every night and who knows what was going on. Because of COVID, everybody had to shut down up here anyways. And the neighborhood I was in at the time, was also, we had a very, large, homeless and mentally ill and drug addicted population. And because of the COVID shutdowns, that population was very negatively affected. A lot of their resources closed. It was just it was a mess. It was just a cocktail of badness, and a lot of businesses were getting broken into, and people, anarchists in quotes. I'm just going to smash windows indeterminately because it's fun. There's just so much going on that it's just everybody boarded up. It's just nobody did not board up. So Yeah, that was quite depressing. But at the same time, you know what? I was just like, I'm just going to have the shows anyways. I sell mostly online regardless. I'll just hire someone to come film the show and I'll put that online. And, yeah, then I'll just work from home. And so that's what we did. And we did fine. So, you know, it sucked not to have openings and hang out with people. But, you know, fortunately, business wise, I was not impacted too much.
So you were able to just proceed with the yearly program just like normal? You didn't have any disruption?
Not really. There might have been a show or two, but generally it kind of kept on. Like the artists had put, you know, a year's worth of effort into their show, and they kind of needed to sort of see some financial results from that. And like I said, you know, I came up with the internet from day one, and most of our buyers are not in Seattle. And anyone who was, I'd be like, come down, you know, when do you want to come down? I'll open the door and you can see the show. So it was really, you know, the shows did as well as they ever did. So very lucky in that regards. I think a lot of people, you know, working at home, not spending money going out. I think a lot of people turned to art, honestly. So we benefited from that in a little strange way. And then, you know, because I was out and about, I found another space in the neighborhood just east of me, this incredible, beautiful spot. And, you know, it was easy for me just to sort of jump to that new space.
And that's in Madison Valley, right?
It is, yeah.
That was like a year ago is when I was starting to see that kind of come together. And I wasn't sure if that was actually a second space or if you were moving. Like, it wasn't clear to me at that point.
I totally wasn't sure either because I still had the lease on the old space, but I kind of wanted out of there because even though we could take our boards down, the neighborhood was still kind of a bit of a mess. It was still like, you know, it's constantly like, I mean, my window did get broken. You know, no one got in, but it was still, you know, it was a kind of constant thread of that kind of stuff that I was just a little, I've been in rough neighborhoods. The gallery's always been in kind of questionable neighborhoods, you know, because we didn't have any money, or the people who would, you know, the rents we could afford were there. You know, so I thought, oh, I'd seen it all, but this was kind of a new level. And again, I'm getting older. My clientele is getting older. And so this new neighborhood, it's still in Seattle, you know, it's just another neighborhood in Seattle, was really quiet and peaceful and really good walkability, more higher end neighborhood. And I thought that would be kind of better for us. And it's turned out to be absolutely awesome. It's been great for us to be in this new neighborhood. And my space is bigger and really beautiful.
And so what, I guess, drove the decision, or how did you navigate that decision of whether or not you should have a second space versus moving? Because I know we talked earlier about one of the lessons learned was you didn't want to overwhelm yourself, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was really like, oh, you know, well, I have the lease on both these spaces. You know, we're in the middle of a pandemic. I don't know that I can find somebody to lease the old space. Who's opening a business right now? No one. So I figured I was just going to have to. And I was like, okay, well, other people do it. You know, maybe I'll try it out. And then within a couple of weeks, I was like, no, one gallery is hard enough. So, I just kept the old space for a little bit and looked for a tenant, and luckily I got one. But very quickly, at first I was like, yeah, I'll just do 2 galleries until my lease runs out. And then very quickly I was like, no way. I do not want to do that. That's not a good idea. And I just shifted gears. I mean, that's the thing. I worked for myself for all this time. I can kind of do what I want.
And so now, like a year later, do you feel pretty settled into the new space?
Oh, yeah. The new space is fantastic. I love it. I get more walk-in traffic there than in this is my 7th location that I've been in. I get more walk-in traffic in this space than I had closer to downtown. Like it's really something. Yeah, it's great. Totally great.
Are there still like things that you want to do that you haven't had a chance to do to the space yet?
Mm. It's I have new things I want to do all the time.
Okay.
I opened a little shop called Roq la Rue Art and Object. Because I have this big space. Over COVID, I got super into interior decor and design, and a gallery is really busy at openings and sometimes Saturdays, but the rest of the time it's pretty quiet in there. And I just kind of wanted another little project to do, and I thought, this could be an interesting way to move into sort of getting into the interior world, which is not bad for art. And just sort of, I think if I curate objects and little cool, weird things that I find, people who like the art are going to like those things. It's all my same vision. So if you're attracted to one thing, you'll probably like the other. And it's just sort of a bit of a hobby. And that seems to be working out. I'm having a lot of fun with that. And I, talk to artists like, hey, I'm thinking of doing this. What do you think? And they were all like, cool, which
Nice.
Another thing I wasn't expecting. I thought they'd be like, what? We want white cube. But the world is changing. The art world's changing. How galleries operate is changing. And, part of the reason I do this and take on all the stress and of running my own business is that I want to do what I want to do as much as I can. That's how I get paid in a certain amount of freedom. I pay for that freedom. You know what I mean? It's a compromise I make. But to me, it's worth it.
Awesome. So we've talked a lot about the past. I want to talk a little bit about the future. You're approaching 25 years, I guess, depending on how you count, if you include the time off or not. Right. It's a hard number to come to. But, and obviously, you just mentioned how much, your gallery and the art scene as a whole has evolved over the years. I guess, how do you see it continuing to evolve, what you're doing?
I have no idea. Obviously this could change at any moment. But honestly, I see myself probably doing this till I drop dead, hopefully of very old age. I'll continue to do the wildlife stuff on the side. But the second half of this year is awesome. My next year is shaping up awesome. I'm kind of like, it took a while to get back into the groove of things when I reopened, because obviously artists were committed out a year or two to other shows. I mean, obviously. So we're starting to just really get rolling again, big time. So I'm very excited for that. I don't know. I mean, I have little ideas for little projects, but I always do. And some of them I do and some of them I don't do. So
do you have any like big bucket list item left that you would want to accomplish in the next, 5 to 10 years?
I'd like to continue the gallery to do well. I have a certain level of artists that I like working with, and hopefully that can continue. I'm kind of anti-art fair, but I would love to do an art fair outside the United States. I'd be very open to that.
And you've spoken out about your dissatisfaction with art fairs in several interviews that I came across. I guess, what is your general discomfort with them?
Well, one, I think they cost too much money. I'm at this position where if an art fair did very badly and I lost that amount of money, that would not be good. So I don't like that aspect of it. I really, because I also have a brick and mortar for the purpose of exhibiting art. And so to have to feel like I had to do art fairs and spend all of that money on top of it kind of got my nose out of joint. We always did okay at them, but I also, I'm really great one-on-one with people, but having to sort of sit in a booth like you're at a trade show and people, just hundreds and hundreds of people, I don't like that. I do not like that. So, those things, I find the art curation in art fairs to be very uneven, and so I'm an outrageous snob about that kind of thing. Ironically, I've always been extremely snobby about what I do. Like, my thing is awesome. That's how I'm still around. But, and so I don't want to be next to a gallery that sucks. So, all those things, I find them really stressful. That said, if I could get into an art fair in Taipei or Mexico City or something, that would be different. That would be kind of exciting and cool. So I'd be a lot more open to it then, but we'll see.
Awesome. What are some of the upcoming shows that you're excited about for this year and, going into next year, whatever you're comfortable talking about?
Yeah, I'm excited for all my shows, which are listed on my website, for the rest of the year. But, from this month forward, every show's kind of a banger, as the kids say. I have an amazing group show called Wild Mystics coming up. Then I have Electric Coffin, which is this incredible art duo from Seattle that are blowing up like crazy. Then I have Camille Rose Garcia. Then I have Femke Heemstra, who's a Dutch artist who I showed a ton over the years, and was a little worried I wasn't going to be able to get her back, because she's moved on when I closed. And so I'm so excited to have her back. And then I have Mary Iverson and Lori Lee Brom and Peter Ferguson and this new artist I'm showing, Hannah Flowers, she's Tasmanian, but lives in Scotland. And she, I had some pieces of hers in a group show, and she's going to do very well. So, she already has a big following. She's going to do very well. So, very excited about all those people. And then, next year, a return of, people like Ben Ashton, who I showed, London artist, who is incredible. So, I'm getting the rotation of like every month is great. I feel like before it was a little stop and stuttering. I had some empty months before that I didn't want to just fill to fill. So I just didn't do anything, but now we're on a roll again. So
awesome.
It's going to be great.
That's exciting. So I guess, where can people find you online to keep up to date with all these new events?
So the website is the best, and to sign up for the email is best because, algorithms on social media. Mm-hmm. So the website is roqlarue.com, ROQLARUE.com. We have an Instagram, which is just at Roq la Rue. And then the shop itself has its own, which is at Roq Art and Objects. Art and Object. No S. And so the shop has stuff, but it'll also be showing art that's not tied to monthly group shows in there. So that will just be random, whatever I think is cool. And, sometimes there's artists who can't get it together for a whole solo show, but they're like, I have 3 pieces, or I could do 3 pieces. I'm like, great, send them up when they're done, and we'll put them in Art and Object and see how it goes. So that's fun too. So that's it. I don't have a Facebook or TikTok or anything yet. So.
Awesome. So last question, and this is something that I like to ask everybody. Who is one artist that you'd like to see me have on the show?
Oh. Wow. Let me think. I actually think Ben Ashton would be very interesting. He's wonderful to talk to about art. And, he would be interesting because he's sort of an outsider coming in to this scene. He's been successful, but he's starting to take off in not just the pop surrealism scene, but he loves it. And so I think, he's in England, and I think somebody's take on all that and his acceptance into it and what he sees of it would be quite fascinating.
Awesome. I'm fascinated by his process, just seeing how he does the paint smear. Like, you paint everything out perfectly and then just completely smear.
Yeah, it's nerve-wracking when he posts those. I'm just like holding my breath, like, oh my God. But, he's pretty pragmatic about it. It's great. And, also somebody who's very savvy to the business side of what the art world is. So, following your muse, but also being aware of what you need to do to be a working artist. I think he'd be a great person to talk to.
Awesome. Great suggestion. I appreciate that. And thank you so much for doing the show. This has really been a lot of fun. It's a treat having you on.
I hope it's interesting to people. I sort of, it's weird to talk about yourself. I'm so used to talking about artists and, not myself. So
awesome.
Hopefully it's not boring.
So that's it for this episode of Art Affairs. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Kirsten. It was so cool to hear about the enormous journey that she and Roq la Rue have had throughout the course of the last 25 years, and the impact and the influence that she's had on the art community during that time. From the early days of lowbrow and pop surrealism to some of the conservation-focused work that she's done in later years. I think the most impressive thing about all of those periods in Roq la Rue's storied history is the consistent vision that Kirsten's provided. Her eye for quality and for talent is unbelievable. But then also what she said about doing business in the right ways, not spending your artist's money and being a conscientious business owner and a community member. Something that seems so simple and fundamental, but which some folks still seem to struggle with sometimes. And it's a topic that we've talked about a lot on this show. I've talked to Andrew about it several times when I've had him on. I've talked with Hebrew about it and the problems that he had with galleries that motivated him to ultimately just start his own business because he was done dealing with it. But as Kirsten said, it really is that simple. If you just don't spend your artist's money and you do right by them and you put in that hard work to actually promote them and market the amazing work that they do, then you can be successful. And it really comes down to that. Well, I guess that's not it. You still have to have a curatorial vision, which obviously Kirsten said is really the hard part and not something that you can really teach in school. It was really nice to hear that she's finally gotten back on her feet following the reopening. I'd never really thought about how challenging those first couple years must have been. Just considering that, artists need time to create the bodies of work that they show with you. And even then, many artists are committed to shows well in advance. So, even getting a consistent lineup for those first few years must have been a real challenge. It's cool to hear that she's back on the other side of that and firing on all cylinders now. They have some really great shows coming up this year. Not long after this episode comes out, they'll be showing Electric Coffin as their June show. And then in July, Camille Rose Garcia. And I have obviously said on the show, I love Camille's work, and it was such a pleasure to have her on, back in episode 40. That episode was legit one of my personal favorite episodes. And not because of anything particularly special that I did, but because of how awesome and interesting Camille is. So definitely get on Roq la Rue's mailing list so you can find out more about these new shows and the rest of what they have coming up for the year. So thanks again to Kirsten for joining me today, and thank you for checking out the show. I'm truly grateful for your support. And just a reminder, one big way you could help out if you're really enjoying the show would be to check out the show's Patreon. You can find all the details on patreon.com/artaffairs. And as always, you can contact me through my website at artaffairs.podcast.com or on Instagram at artaffairs.podcast. So until next time, be good to yourself and be good to each other.